Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second professional development series event of the 2022-23 academic year. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the series of events here, my name is Nick Matar, and I am the Director of Marketing here at the Wayne State University Graduate School. This is in our second event here today. We're talking about how to be not just a good mentor, but a great mentor. And our graduate school associate dean, Todd Leff, will be leading today's presentation. A couple of notes before Todd starts. If you have questions as we go along, this is meant to be more interactive and engaging. Please feel free to leave a message in the chat. You can use the old raise hand feature with your Zoom technology, or you can wait till the end. There will be ample time at the end of the session to also ask questions, get your questions answered. This is a friendly environment where you are welcome to share your candid thoughts on mentorship. And I know here at Wayne State, mentorship is a big thing that a lot of individuals have pursued, both either as a mentor or a mentee. We've done sessions in the past on this topic. So if you want to go back and watch any of the previous sessions, we had 2 last year. They are available on our YouTube channel. If you have not already, be sure to subscribe to the graduate school's YouTube channel as well. Not just the Wayne State proper channel, but we have one ourselves as well. And these sessions are all there. After the session is completed, I will send a survey as well as a thank you email. This is being recorded and will be posted to YouTube, so there will be a link to that video as well. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Todd for today's presentation. Todd, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Hello, everybody. I am, as Nick said, Associate Dean at the Graduate School, and I have an academic role at the School of Medicine. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself as we get into this. But before we start, the topic of this is how to be a good mentor, or Nick said how to be a great mentor. But really, in looking at everybody who's signed up and their roles, it's a very mixed audience, and it looks to be about half students and half faculty or staff. And so I've made some adjustments, and I'm going to try to present something that is really sort of just my thoughts with some things I borrowed from more knowledgeable sources, on not only how to be a good mentor, but how to be a good mentee. And so really the topic here is how to establish a functional, efficient, and mutually beneficial mentor-mentee relationship. And so that's I just want to make that adjustment from the beginning. The other thing I want to do is make it clear that I'm open to interruption throughout the whole thing. I'm actually not entirely sure how long my presentation is going to be, but I think it's so important to get people's input, ideas, and thoughts on many of these topics that if you have something to say, something to add, or a question to ask, put it in the chat. Nick or Mary will relay the message to me. And I guess I should also add that we should keep this isn't really meant to be an airing of grievances, which sometimes when we talk about mentor-mentee relationships, things can evolve in that direction, but more questions and answers about the best practices and maybe how to solve general problems. Okay, so let me share my screen here, make sure this works properly, and get up to the start. Okay. Nick, is this showing okay?
It looks great.
Okay. All right. This is obviously the title slide. So a little, just an overview of what of what I want to talk about, or what I want us to talk about. I'm going to introduce myself, and with sort of an emphasis on my mentoring background. And as you will see, I have some experience mentoring and being mentored, but this is in no way an academic area for me. This is my thoughts on this, and what we're going to be talking about are derived from my personal experience primarily. And so I think it's worthwhile to spend a minute so you know what that experience is. And then I want to talk a little bit about why this is such an important aspect of graduate education. It's actually, I would say, central in many ways to successful graduate education, especially of a PhD graduate education, doctoral graduate education. And then it's pretty simple. After that, we're going to talk about the characteristics of being a good mentor, the characteristics of being a good mentee, and this idea of that a mentee, that as a mentee you have actual responsibilities. It's not just that the mentor, it's not only the mentor who has formal responsibilities in the relationship. It goes both ways. And then I want to introduce something that many of you may be familiar with, the idea of a compact between a mentor and mentee, that is a formal document that is reviewed and possibly signed by both parties, that is a good place to start and a good foundation to develop a functional relationship on. I'm just going to go over an example of that. And that sort of brings up another issue with this. As you see, my background is science, biomedical research, and sort of by default, I tend to put things in the framework of PhD education in that context. And I've tried to make this as general as possible, but we need to keep in mind, I try to keep in mind all the time, that there is a very wide range of interactions that occur in PhD education because of the different fields that we all are involved with, and some are, like mine, highly, experimental, hands-on experimental, and others are much less so. And then I just want to close with a couple of sort of other types of mentor-mentee relationships that might be valuable. This would be directed mostly towards the students in the audience. Okay. All right. So why am I giving this presentation? So it is not because I have made an academic study of this relationship. Many people have, and there's actually a rich literature out there on ideas about how to make this relationship work the best. But I do have some experience from both sides of the coin. So as a mentee, I was an undergraduate at the University of Iowa, and had almost 2 years of research in a laboratory. So I had an undergraduate mentor who was different than my undergraduate advisor. It was a true mentor. I got my PhD at Indiana University, so I've experienced what is essentially the focus of what we're going to be talking about today, the relationship between a PhD student and the advisor, the thesis mentor. I did my postdoctoral fellowship in Strasbourg, France, in a large laboratory, and I had a postdoctoral advisor who served as a mentor in that stage of my career, which is different than being a graduate student. And because of the structure of universities in Europe, it was sort of a different style of mentoring entirely. And then my first faculty job at Rockefeller, I had a faculty mentor that provided essentially that function, but in a different context. And then from the other side of the coin, I've had, since I've been at Wayne, 6 students that I've advised, that I've been served as primary advisor, PhD or MD PhD students. I've been on a lot of thesis committees. I was actually kind of surprised when I looked through my records as to how many I've served on. And this sort of broadens the view of an experience that I've had with mentor-mentee relationships, because in every one of these that I've been on, it's sort of like a bird's eye view of a particular mentor-mentee relationship. And it's very valuable to see the huge range of activities and approaches to this, and the huge range of successes and failures that can be attributed to the quality of the relationship. I've had postdocs in my lab that is also a form of mentoring, again, kind of different, as are the fairly large number of undergraduates I've had in the lab. I'm also, for the last 15 years, I've been the director of a PhD program, a small PhD program, but I've seen quite a bit of quite a bit of experience from that perspective. And then this is somewhat peripheral, but the whole middle part of my career, I wasn't in academics. I was in pharmaceutical industry, and it's a totally different, it's not necessarily an educational mentor-mentee relationship, but there is the same type of mentor-mentee relationships that occur throughout, in this case, the pharmaceutical industry. And this I think would be true for any professional job that you will end up in. And a lot of the things that you sort of learn about the interaction between a mentor and a mentee in the setting that we're going to be talking about are applicable to a broader context. All right, so what I want to talk about now is just very briefly something that is probably very obvious to most people in the audience, is that why this relationship, why a mentor-mentee relationship is so important in graduate education. And one of the ways to think about this is to compare undergraduate education, which is basically designed to impart knowledge to people, to students. Compare that to graduate education, where in addition to that, the delivery of knowledge to students, we are training students to be contributors in a field, to discover new knowledge and to create things that weren't there, that didn't exist before. And the skills necessary to do that, this is true in every field, I think, that's represented at the university. The skills that are required to do that are best imparted on an individualized basis, with the student learning the details of how a successful person in that field has been successful. And so I think that's sort of the underlying thing. Graduate education has a much stronger individual component, where the student is learning from a single person or a single group. There are some other really important issues about mentorship and graduate education that I want to touch on here. One is the role of the mentor in professional what I would think about as professional socialization. And in many cases, the thesis mentor is the student's first entry point into that field that they're presumably going to be spending the rest of their lives in. And it's the launching point for developing the contacts, what I've been calling the socialization in that particular field or endeavor. And the mentor can provide all of those initial contacts. And another thing about a mentor is that they have a much more, a very likely extremely nuanced understanding of the norms and expectations of a given field, things that you wouldn't necessarily learn about during in my area during the research part of your career. Is somebody has to tell you sort of outside of the curriculum what the norms and expectations and the sort of the social structure of this field is. And the mentor, that is one of the key things that a mentor can do for a graduate student. And the sort of related thing is the idea of career guidance. And this is something we'll be touching on in a couple different places here. A major role of the mentor is to help launch the student into the career path that they've chosen. And that's a difficult issue in many cases, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. The basic idea, well, I guess this is sort of an additional thing, is that a good mentor in a graduate program can help the student avoid many of the common pitfalls that occur in graduate education. And for the students here, you've probably already experienced what many of those are. And the difference between a good and a bad mentor can boil down in some cases, in many ways, to how the mentor advises the student with regard to some of the pitfalls of spending 5 years working on a single or very focused project. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Okay, so I found these in sort of my research. So I had a lot of very specific ideas about this and how to be a good mentor. But I recognized fairly early on in putting this presentation together that there are much broader views of mentoring and the mentor-mentee relationship out there than what I've experienced. And so in looking around, I found this is actually not in an academic environment, I found a paper on good mentorship practices. And it was really part of business, it was devised out of a business environment. But I actually liked these three things. The title of this article was "The 3 A's of Good Mentorship," and at first I thought, well, that's not detailed enough. I'm not interested in that. But actually, I think this sort of boils down into a very simple set of 3 items. Some of the key things of what good mentorship is. And they are availability. You can't be a good mentor if you're not available when needed for advice and for guidance. So availability was number 1. Active listening, and I think this is extremely important because there's a tendency in this relationship for the mentor to be to be the fount of all knowledge and to spend all of the time in the relationship imparting knowledge. I've noticed this in my own mentoring, is that it's hard. It sometimes is tempting to feel like you know everything, and that all you have to do is tell your student all of the things that you know about a particular topic, and that isn't really part of what good mentor. Well, I guess it is part of what good mentorship is, but the essence of it is that the mentor actually interacts in a two-way conversation, two-way interaction with the student. So active listening is crucial. You actually pay attention and absorb what in this case, the student is telling you. And then the third thing is sort of the obvious, providing advice. It's in the context of this paper, they call it analysis, but it's really applying your understanding of whatever the field is and whatever the profession is to solving the problems that have been presented or issues that have occurred during the course of the graduate education. So this is sort of this is the boiled down version of what I think is really important in mentorship. Everything else, so all the rest of the slides are much less boiled down, more detailed, and in quite a bit more depth. This is what I want to go through now are a set of very specific items that I think are particularly important for good mentoring in the context of PhD education. I've broken them down into 4 different categories because there's a lot of them. And the 4 categories are the role of the mentor in intellectual development of the student, the career development of the student, and then in the maintenance of a good work environment. We'll talk about that in some detail. And then the last thing is the role of the mentor in guiding the student through the specifics of whatever the program of the PhD program milestones. Just something that's sort of sometimes it's a shared responsibility between the mentor and the program director or the department or the graduate school in some cases, but I think it's an important aspect of this. Okay, so I guess let me start with these. This is the intellectual development, what I view as the intellectual development roles. And the next few slides, most of the rest of the slides are going to be this sort of dense textual stuff, bullet points with a lot of writing, so I'm apologizing for that. I teach a course at the medical school that involves graduate students putting together a 10-minute talk. And I spend most of the time telling them, whatever you do, don't give a talk where the only thing on the slide is text over and over again. And I'm afraid that's what we're going to be facing with for the next half an hour or so. Anyway, let's get started. So some of the key traits that an effective mentor needs for intellectual development of the student is, and this is the primary one in my mind, is to encourage independence of thought and action, to actively encourage independence of thought and action. So that's sort of the general, the broad view of that. The more specifically, and the next few things are going to be different in different fields and different environments, but I think they're related. There's related things in every field, every endeavor that is part of the graduate education at Wayne. So the mentor must work closely with the student to design a meaningful thesis project. This is sort of the foundation of PhD education, is a thesis project, and that's devised as in my mind, must be devised as a joint project between the mentor and the mentee, the advisor and the student. There are some circumstances where the advisor dictates the project, essentially, that is less desirable than it being a project that is developed as an interaction between both people, both parties. And I think occasionally there's circumstances where a student arrives in a program with a very strong idea of what they want to do, and in which case the balance is maybe tilted a little stronger to the student. A key aspect of the relationship is regular analysis and evaluation of progress. And this is going to pop up over and over again in different contexts. And then finally, for this, the mentor must provide consistent, constructive, and honest feedback on whatever the relevant skills are for that field. And it doesn't really matter. In my field, the relevant skills are technical skills as well as intellectual skills. That might not be the case everywhere. I think the crucial thing here is that the feedback is consistent, not once a year, but consistent throughout every year, constructive. And this is just it's the proper way to give advice and feedback is to do it in a constructive way, and that it be honest, and that the deficits or weak points in the skill set that is being worked towards are clearly identified, and that a plan is put into place to address those deficits. And so some of the things that are general, I think, among all things are writing and presentation skills among all the fields across campus. Some things like technical abilities are really relevant only to certain fields. Okay. And now this is another important part of mentorship, and this sometimes I've noticed is a part of mentoring that doesn't work very well. And this may be something that is a little bit different in sort of STEM biomedical stuff than across campus, but it is definitely something I feel that we as mentors don't do a particularly good job with. So the key issues here are to regularly discuss career goals and how to achieve them with students. This is frequently something that simply isn't, I know from my own experience, isn't done. I think we've gotten better at it over the last couple of years. I know I've gotten better at it, but it's a crucial part of mentorship. And then there's some practical aspects of this. A mentor, a part of the role of a mentor is to help the student identify the next step, whatever, if it's going out to the job market, or if it's doing a postdoc position, finding a postdoc position, that a responsibility of the mentor is to help with that and guide that. And going along with that is sort of standard things that I think everybody does very well: provide letters of recommendations that are honest. And then some sort of indirect things that aren't directly related to how a student progresses towards a specific career. But these are more indirect things that are required, things that are required for success in any field. And no matter what the field is, there has to be a demonstration of scholarly production. So that has to be one of the things that a mentor motivates the student to do. And these are different in different fields, but generally it's publications, presentations at conferences or meetings. And in some circumstances, this would also include, and very importantly include, fellowship and grant applications. Some of the fields that our students end up in are research fields that are functionally dependent on acquiring external funding, and that's a skill set that's absolutely required. It needs to start early. And then another sort of indirect thing that wasn't totally obvious to me, but I think I've seen it on a lot of lists of what good mentoring is, and that's to acknowledge in the appropriate venues the contribution of the student to whatever the field is. And I mean, this is meant to sort of go beyond being just an authorship spot on a paper, but acknowledging and promoting student contributions in the field in general, I think, is an important part of this. And then this idea of that a mentor should be actively maintaining a good work environment, that is appropriate and efficient and effective. So the details of that would be to make sure that the mentor encourages a respectful and open communication environment where everybody feels comfortable expressing their own ideas. It's hard to provide sort of specific advice on how to do that, but it's obvious that that is a desirable goal. It's also important that a mentor ensures their work environment is safe. This is mostly thinking about laboratory type environments, but safety, it could mean a variety of things outside a laboratory, but in all cases equitable and free from all forms of harassment or discrimination. So this is maybe not part of what traditionally would have thought of as the purely academic role of a mentor, but this is a crucial part of positive and effective graduate education. And then one of the things that is also very important, and in my experience doesn't always work, is to directly communicate the expectation regarding work habits. And this is one of those things that's highly variable in different disciplines across campus. But one thing that's not variable is that it's important for the student to understand exactly what's expected of them with regard to work habits and workplace behavior. And then this last point is I think it's important for these things to occur by example, so that the mentor is behaving in a way that you would want your students to behave with regard to ethical approaches to research, so responsible conduct of research, basically. All right, and this final set of items for being an effective mentor is this idea that one of the responsibilities of the mentor, and I would call this a shared responsibility with other groups, like the program director, or maybe the graduate school, maybe the department, is to keep tabs on progress through the program. And there, as we all know, there are a lot of milestones that have to be achieved. Some of them have time components, many of them have time components associated with them. And when you are deeply involved in whatever your research, your thesis project is, it is possible to lose sight of some of these things. And it's beneficial for both the mentor and the mentee. And you'll see I have a very similar list of what the mentee has to do, and it actually is very reflective of the expectations of the mentor. Both parties have to pay a lot of attention to program milestones and making sure everything is done properly. There's nothing worse than getting to the end of things and finding out that a key milestone was not actually met properly. This also includes, in my mind, the mentor helping the graduate student maintain proper funding sources or suitable funding sources. And this could be in the form of GRAs, graduate research assistants, or graduate teaching assistants, internal scholarships, and this would also be true for external scholarships. I think I view this as a responsibility of the mentor. And then for almost all fields, in one form or another, there is the work has to be made public. And in the STEM field and the biomedical field, these are there frequently are requirements for student publications to be out before a thesis can be approved, or a thesis defense can be approved, and so that it's crucial that be part of what the mentor is focused on. Okay, so now I want to turn to some of the issues related to the mentee. Nick, was there anything in the chat that needs to be relayed, or maybe this is a good place to stop and give anybody an opportunity to put in their 2 cents in this, or raise issues that they've run across that they think are important.
Yeah, there weren't any things in the chat, but I did have a question that I got sent privately. And from the mentor side, you cover a lot of really good resources, but what's a good place for somebody to start who hasn't ever actually been a mentor and they're looking to gain some experience? On one hand, you have some opportunities that kind of naturally arise, somebody that's looking for a mentor and you happen to be in that area. But what if that's not really available and you just kind of want to, you're interested in it and you're looking for a place to start? Where would somebody go about looking for that?
There is, I think I mentioned earlier, there's actually a fairly active literature that's relatively easy to run across on the internet. The place that I would start, and this happens to be very oriented towards biomedical research, but there's a publication, and I actually will show you the cover page of it in a later slide, that is basically, it's actually the American, the AAMC, American Medical, I've forgotten what it stands for. That is a description of good mentoring practices and includes mentor responsibilities, mentee responsibilities. It's very strongly tilted towards biomedical research, but there are other publications that are similar. And I'll actually, I don't have a slide with it, but I have a list of resources. And I think, Nick, there's maybe a way to attach that to the final when we're all done.
Yeah, I can always put that into the email as well that we send afterwards.
Okay.
If
All
others have questions so far, please put them into the chat or go ahead and raise your hand. You can come off mute and ask as well.
Questions or even comments? All right. Well, while people are thinking about stuff, let's talk a little bit about being a mentee and what are, I guess you'd call, best practices from the mentee side of things. And there were three subtopics that I wanted to touch on here. One is picking a mentor and what to expect from your mentor. This is crucial to graduate education, and the students that I advise, either who come to my program or that I run across at the graduate school, my job at the graduate school, I always tell them that this is probably the crucial step in graduate education is finding the right mentor. Probably more, in my mind, more crucial or as important as finding the right thesis project. That this relationship between you and your mentor is it sets the tone for your entire graduate career. So I want to spend a minute talking about that, and then go through mentee responsibilities, which you'll see are reflect to a large degree the responsibilities that we talked about for the mentor, with some obvious differences. And then very briefly, but very importantly, I want to make a point that it is worthwhile for mentees, for students, to understand what your mentor is going through, what his life or her life is like, because many of the circumstances where a problem has arisen that can be tracked down to a mentor-mentee relationship or a breakdown of the mentor-mentee relationship are caused, but to some degree, by a lack of understanding of some of the pressures that many faculty members face. And it's easier to work through problems that occur in this relationship if both parties have a good understanding of what the other person is going through. And it's a little bit of a lopsided thing, because all mentors for thesis projects have been students, they have been mentees, so they've been in that role. But and this obviously by definition, None of the mentees have ever been in the position where that the mentor is in. So I want to talk about that for a minute. All right. So how to pick a mentor, and really, that to me that this really is an exercise of self-reflection first. You really have to decide and think about and sort of have an internal discussion about what you want to do, what your goals are. And those can be broken down, at least in my mind, I broke them down into a couple of specific points. And the first one is, why am I in graduate school? What am I doing here? What are my specific goals? Is it to get a job in a very specific field? Is it purely a learning exercise because you're fascinated by a particular topic or a particular area? It's really worthwhile to spend some time in consolidating those ideas in your mind. It will help you identify the best possible mentor. And then it's worthwhile to ask what type of training do I desire? What area? And really, this is what is the specific academic area that I want to focus on? And this is more specific than just thinking English versus endocrinology. Let's say, you obviously have applied to graduate school with a pretty good idea already of what you want to do. But within that area, there's, of course, very specific sub areas. And it's worthwhile to know if you have a specific interest, you want that to align to find somebody as an advisor whose interests align with yours as much as possible. And it's surprising the number of students who get to this point and haven't fully thought or haven't thought as carefully as they should about what interests them. What is it in this field that really totally grabs me? And then I find a person in the faculty list that is closest to that. And then another really important thing is and this is another hard thing to do. And I know this is one of the things that I didn't do when I was a graduate student. I didn't sit down and think about what am I good at and what am I not so good at? What do I need help with in terms of my own development? Am I a terrible writer? Do I need help with writing and composing, getting my thoughts out on paper? Do I have a weakness in a particular academic area that needs to be developed? And that can be very guiding also in how you pick an advisor. If you know that there's an area you need that you feel you need work on, and you know there's somebody on the faculty that's a strength of what they do or how they do their research, then that would be a person you would want to gravitate towards. And then it's one of the things that's difficult about picking a mentor is matching your style, sort of your learning style with the mentor. And sometimes this, the way I've formulated it here, is in the form of whether you are sort of a lone worker or you work in a team, or you really can only work in a team and you don't like being off on your own, doing your own project. And this is important because different advisors have different ways of conducting whatever research they're doing in their field or whatever their endeavor is. And you want to also match, I guess I'd call it sort of learning style as much as you can. And then finally, what career do I want to pursue? And in the area that I'm most familiar with in biomedical research, this might be, you want to end up in the pharmaceutical industry. That the last thing you want to do is to get a tenure track job in a university. And if that was the case, you would want to maybe have as your advisor, or at least on your thesis committee, somebody with some experience in that, in this case, in the pharmaceutical industry, but it could be in whatever type of career that you want to pursue. So these are all really, really important things that I think if you spend a student spending time thinking about this will make a better choice. Now, I think there's also a good place to point out that if you do this exercise, you construct in your head your ideal mentor. It's almost guaranteed that you're not going to find that person. In most graduate programs, not just at Wayne, but everywhere that I've ever been, there's a limited number of people that you can work with and can serve as your thesis advisor. But so the exercise is not to find that perfect person, that perfect advisor. Is to find the best advisor you can, given whatever environment you find yourself in. So one of the things that also helps in not only in choosing an advisor, but once you have an advisor, in what you should expect of that person, what's reasonable to expect and what isn't. I have the following four possibilities, and I'm sure this list could be much longer. But I'd say one of the key things is that the advisor or potential advisor is clearly takes an interest in developing the careers and education of students. And you can judge, this can be judged by talking to other students in the program, by talking to the person yourself and developing your own opinion, but it's crucial. And in some circumstances, it's not universal. So it's a consideration that is important. You want to you should expect somebody who has good interpersonal skills, and this is so I guess another way to describe this: somebody who's personable and as well as professional in how they relate to their mentees. And this is an interesting thing, because the balance between in the relationship between a mentee and a mentor, between a personal relationship and a professional relationship, is highly variable, and different mentees and different mentors have dramatically different views of how that balance should be. And so it's worthwhile to try to, as much as possible, match those characteristics. You should expect, as a mentee, you should expect your mentor to actively advance your academic and professional goals. And they should do that, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next couple of slides, in the context of what you, as the student, what your desired career direction, actually a professional direction, is. They should be responsive to what your thoughts are, your ideas, and your vision of yourself. And then finally, and this is an important thing that sometimes is hard to judge, but an effective mentor, a good mentor, in my view, is, and I think in most people's views, is somebody who has the ability to adjust their style or to accommodate in their style all the differences in background, that in cultural background, ethnicity, gender, that are the represented in our student body. And this is, I think, a crucial aspect of having a good mentor-mentee relationship, and being in a research group or having an advisor, being in a group that functions well. Excuse me. This is maybe another good place to point out that this is related mostly to this third point here, that the advisor is willing and able and does take into account that the student may have different career goals than the advisor had. And it's one of the one of the, I think, universal characteristics in the academic world is that most of us who have made their careers there sort of view the world that way and just assume everybody who we're training them to do what we are doing, working in the academic world. And that is very definitely not the case, not the reality. And some people are better, some advisors are better at that than others. And I think it's an important consideration when you're thinking about your mentor. Now this final, let me just go through these. These are going to look very, very similar to what I listed as, or some of what I listed as the mentor responsibilities. So this is what I think a mentee ought to do, how they ought to approach this relationship. A mentee should pursue their academic goals with intensity and motivation, and with creativity. That's almost a given. That's just a general requirement for success in graduate education, even outside of considerations of the particular mentor-mentee relationship we're talking about. And then the second point is, I think, crucial. I'm going to come back to it a couple of times. It's important that the student, the mentee, take ownership of his or her training. This has to be done with guidance, in collaboration with your advisor and your advisors and your thesis committee. But it's important that as a student, as a mentee, you don't view this relationship as a one-way relationship, that your mentor is responsible for all of your training, for making sure you get through all the different steps appropriately. This is really your responsibility as the student, and it's going to be done in collaboration with your advisor. And this is sort of along the same lines. A mentee should think intentionally and frequently about all of the goals for training, and this will be all the short-term and long-term training and development goals. So this is related to not only career issues, but also whatever the topic of the thesis is, so the research issues. Another important point, and this is sort of related to the availability of the 3 A's I mentioned earlier. The student should be actively arranging to meet regularly with the thesis advisor. And this is best done as a collaborative thing where you sit down and say, we should meet once a week in a formal way, or once every 2 weeks, or whatever is appropriate for the field. But it's important from the mentee perspective that you don't simply wait for the program or the mentor to tell you how to do this. This should be something you actively pursue. And that's the same thing with initiating regular meetings with the thesis committee. It's something that's a little outside of what we're talking about today, but your thesis committee is another form of mentorship, and it should be viewed that way. And it should, as a student, you should take advantage of it in that way and view them as maybe as secondary mentors to all aspects of your education and career development. And then, I think it's important for students to step outside a little bit of their immediate research project and make sure that you participate in all the available seminars or whatever the professional activities are associated with your program. And that's just, I think that's just absolutely crucial. So this is just a couple of final thoughts that are related to what your responsibilities are as a student, as a mentee, of complying with institutional policies. So this would be, for example, responsible conduct of research that all students take. And then a really important thing that gets overlooked a lot. I know in my own program it's overlooked almost routinely, and that's to have a direct, clear discussions about expectations for work hours, what to do about sick leave and vacation time. These are things that that are in some programs. There are not formal policies, and the formal policy or the practical policy is something that you work out with your thesis advisor. In any case, however it's done in your program, it should be talked about and should be clear so everybody knows what the expectations are. And then this final thing is basically a reminder that one of the tools that's available to help with the mentor-mentee pair develop a career plan is the individual development plan program that is part of what the graduate school does. So I'd encourage everybody to utilize that. So the last thing I want to talk about from the mentee perspective is this idea that I mentioned earlier, that it's important for students to understand the life and pressures of their mentors. And this cartoon, many of you have probably seen this. It's from these collection of PhD comics that are mostly pretty good. But so this is about how professors spend their time. And on the left here is sort of what the university, and at least in is variable according to the different colleges and schools and programs, but how the university divides up, you know, when they say we're paying you to do a certain amount of teaching, a certain amount of research, and a certain amount of service. And in some places that would look very much like this. Service meaning work on committees and so on. That's the reality. That's how promotions are determined and so on. And then if you look at from the perspective of the mentor, what they're being told is important. And this, for example, at the medical school or many of our STEM-based programs is very very strong, is that we're expected to do research. But this is a joke here, obviously, but more than 100% of our time, with a little bit of teaching and a little bit of service, but we're expected, and there is literally a lot of pressure to produce research and to get grants. And this is in really sharp contrast with what's expected. And it makes it difficult in some cases for mentors to simply carve out the time necessary for being a good, attentive, active mentor. And so we all overcome that. And but I think it's valuable for students to understand that, and that the world looks a little bit different from that perspective. And then this final things of most of us, most faculty members really don't want to be told by anybody what to do. I know I think this is important, and it's a little bit of a joke here, but I think it is something that makes the relationship work better if the student fully understands the pressures that their advisor is feeling. Okay, and I want to, let's see, how are we doing? I'm going to very briefly talk about the idea of a compact, a formal agreement between formal in the sense that it's written down. I don't think it's formal in the sense of it being a legal agreement, but a compact between the advisor and the advisee, between the mentor and the mentee. That is something that's taken seriously, at least, even if it's not a legal thing. And it can really help lay the groundwork. And I'm giving one example. There are examples of this all over. And I know there are some programs at Wayne that utilize a compact between the advisor and the advisee. But this is one example from one of the medical student organizations. And it's actually one of the authors of this was Ambika Mathur, who was a graduate school dean a few years ago here at Wayne. And I'm not going to go through this in detail. It is a more formal statement of most of the points that I've already mentioned. And this one happens to be very oriented around a research intense environment, but there are the very same type of compact could be constructed for any of our PhD thesis, our PhD programs. And they are basically an acknowledgement of who has responsibility for what components of the program and of the relationship between the mentor and the mentee. And I will not read through these. If you go through them, you will see that they reflect very strongly what I talked about earlier. One of the things I wanted to emphasize here is, again, this idea that as a graduate student, as a mentee, you should view that relationship as being equal parts, and that you have as much responsibility for the successful completion of the degree as your advisor does, and should approach all aspects of it from that perspective. And again, these are reiterations of what I've already talked about. And again, another acknowledgement that I have, as a student, the primary responsibility for the development of my own career. You should not be depending on other people. You can depend on other people for advice, but you are making the decisions about how to approach your career and what direction you want it to go. And then there's an equivalent set of commitments for the mentor. And the idea, and again, I won't go through these in detail. The idea is that this document is read through by both parties together and discussed and agreed upon. And it maybe seems like some of it is unnecessary, some of it is obvious, but I think it's beneficial to start off a relationship like with this sort of document. And now, just to close, I want to talk about some other mentoring roles that might be valuable. This is mostly directed towards the students in the audience, but there is an argument to be made for having more than one mentor, not more than one thesis mentor necessarily, but one of the things that is evident from my experience, and I think most people would agree, is that no thesis advisor can be perfect in all aspects of what we've been talking about. And there are a lot of reasons for this. One of them is just a limited experience. But some of them are maybe a little bit less obvious. There's actually a very clear competing interest that the advisor or the mentor has with regard to the mentee. As a thesis mentor, you basically train somebody to get really good at doing something that is similar or identical to what your field, your discipline actually is. And you've spent whatever, 3 or 4 or 5 years training that person, and then they leave and go off to do something else. And there is a tendency to want to have the students stay around a little bit longer and contribute to the research program of the advisor. And this is, almost everybody I know has this well under control, but there is always this underlying component to this relationship that has to be considered all the time. Another thing that's very clear and very strong is that almost by definition, most mentors have a fairly limited career perspective. Most of us in academics followed a fairly traditional, straight pathway into an academic position. And it's a fact that many of our students are either not interested or for one reason or another don't want that career path. And so it's hard to advise a student on getting a job in, say, the pharmaceutical industry if you've never worked in the pharmaceutical industry. So that's one limit, another limitation of the relationship we've been talking about that can be overcome by adding additional mentors to your sort of mentor portfolio. And then there are also serious issues with different cultural backgrounds. You may benefit hugely from having a mentor or an advisor who shares more of your cultural background than your current academic advisor. So one of the ways to approach this is, and this is fairly common, I've seen it in the literature fairly frequently, is to have an additional research mentor, and I'll talk just very briefly about what that might be, a career mentor, and a life mentor. So these would be three separate mentors. They're not part of any formal part of your PhD program. These are relationships that you would have to establish. You would have to actively go out and develop. But there are examples of this, and many examples where this has been very beneficial for students. So a second research mentor would be, this is a little bit of a tricky one, because in many cases, the research done in, if it's a laboratory, by the mentor there's a understanding of a proprietary component to the research, and so having two advisors is not always a good idea. But on the other hand, in most fields of research that of thesis research, one of the underlying things is to get multiple opinions on the value of what you're doing, and this, I view this as falling into that category. And a very a likely person for this would be one of the members of your thesis committee, who's obviously going to be knowledgeable about your research. They hope you want to pick somebody who's easy to connect with and that you can talk to easily. And this can be a good sort of balancing thing and sort of broaden your perspective on your own research and counteract a little bit the narrowing that occurs as you focus deeply on one very specific topic or project. A career mentor is really important for the reasons I mentioned earlier. It's very possible your advisor simply doesn't have much experience in the career that you would like to work towards. And the best way to approach this is to find somebody who has the job that you want. This requires work on your part as a student, but it's doable. And when you get down to it, most people like to give advice on if they're approached, and this can be extremely valuable under many circumstances. And then finally, and this is my last slide, you can make an argument that it's worthwhile to have a life mentor, a mentor who's outside of the academic, this highly focused academic world that you find yourself in, and that somebody who knows you and can sort of balance out and broaden your overall perspective on what you're doing and help you maybe get through some of the day-to-day trials that occur continuously during graduate education, and keep you more balanced and in the end a more effective student of whatever field you're in. So I do know some people who've actively gone out and found additional mentors and have gotten a lot of benefit from them. And I think it's something that's worth considering. So I'm pretty sure that is my last slide. Yes, if I'd be happy to discuss or answer any questions or discuss any issues that anybody has that they'd like to raise, or if there's something in the chat that I haven't seen.
Yeah, sure. There's I don't see anything in the chat, and I know we're running a little bit over, but if anybody does have any quick questions, please feel free to come off mute and ask. Otherwise, thank you very much, Todd, for the presentation here today. I do, so if anybody has any quick questions, please feel free to come on and off of mute and ask. Otherwise, we'll wrap up today's session. I will be sending an email out with the video to today's session tomorrow, most likely. And be sure to come by in a couple of weeks. We're going to talk about the basics of health insurance, what to look for when you're picking out an employer-sponsored plan. A lot of times people, when they are new employees, get given a packet of information, and that's kind of the end of it, kind of left on their own. They don't know things like what's an HMO or a PPO. So we will have a speaker ready and queued up to talk about all of that as well. Otherwise, that wraps up today's session. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and we will see you all next time.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.